Several years ago, when GPSs were available, but they were not really common, some had them, probably safe to say by far most didn't. I get a phone call from my wife, and I'm kind of on the other side of Nashville, and I'm trying to do the shortcut from one hospital on the other side of Nashville to another hospital at another part of Nashville, all on the outskirts of Nashville. And I'm trying to get that hospital visit made in time to get back for an appointment at the office that afternoon. And I realize I'm lost. And, that's frustrating within itself. But when you know that, hey, if I remain lost for like another 15 or 20 minutes, I'm not going to have time to make this hospital visit and make it back for my appointment, which means I'm going to have to drive all the way back across Nashville. And then sometime tomorrow, I'm going to have to drive all the way back across Nashville again to make this. And so it was that frustration that when my wife calls, she says, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "I'm lost, and I am sick and tired of being lost. I don't have time to be lost." And I was kind of venting to her, and I just kind of threw out, I said, "I want a GPS so this stops." And so a few months, Christmas comes along, and I unwrap a Garmin, and I was like, this is the way to go. And so, now people think I'm crazy because if I have any kind of GPS system to rely upon, they'll say, "Hey," it happened just last week. I was speaking somewhere, and somebody said, "Hey, now what road did you drive here?" I was like, "Can you throw out some options?" And they threw out a couple of options. I said, "Now what towns do those go through?" And they mentioned a few towns. I said, "I really don't have a clue." I said, "I don't recognize anything you said. I'm sure I drove through one of those towns on one of those roads, but I don't know." And so I love GPSs. I love them. And I know people say, "Yeah, but sometimes it gets you lost." I'll take the getting lost one out of 1,000 times next to the every time. I'll take it every time. And so I got to thinking about relationships. What if you had a GPS like for your relationship? Like guys, when she walks in and she says, "Hey, honey, should I wear the red shoes or the black shoes?" And you know how guys, "Oh, honey, it doesn't matter. Either one looks good." What if then all of a sudden you heard in your mind, "Recalculating," and about the time she was walking away, you said, "Hey, honey, the red shoes look better." And she goes, "Oh, thank you. You're so sweet." How cool would it be to have some kind of system that could tell you how to understand your spouse? What about, "Hey, honey, does this outfit make me look big?" What about before you ever opened your mouth, "Honey, that makes you look great." What about it's getting close to your anniversary? You're driving home. And you hear, "Recalculating." Make a U-turn when legal. Recalculating. You need to go to the mall. Recalculating. Do not go home until you get a gift. How awesome would that be? God made us different. When you put a group of little girls between the age of 2 and 4 in a room playing together, they talk almost non-stop, all of them. When you put little boys in a room playing together between 2 and 4, you hear very few words, but you hear a lot of truck sounds, you hear a lot of explosive sounds, and you hear a lot of dinosaur sounds. And you say, "Now wait a minute. Why do these two playrooms look and sound so differently from each other?" Why? Because God made us different from birth. But we have to love and respect God's plan that He made us to be companions. And even the parts that we don't really understand, why did God make us so differently? I ask you to trust Him. There is a reason why He made us so different. Even if we don't understand it completely on this earth, there's no doubt there is a reason behind. Tonight, I'd like to begin this session with just a few verses to remind you of first a basic concept. And that is, nothing trumps love. In spite of the differences, will you love them anyway? 1 John 4:8 tells us, he who does not love does not know God, for God is love. How great is love? Well, it depends if you want to know God or not. If you're not willing to learn about love, you're not willing to learn about God. God is love. When God looks at the way you interact on a daily basis, not what you would say if somebody said, do you love your wife? Oh, of course I love my wife. We're not asking what your verbiage is. We're saying by the way you act. We're talking about the depths of your heart. Do we love one another? When the Lord Jesus was asked what's the first and greatest commandment, out of all the commandments He could have chosen, He quickly said it was to love God with your heart, soul, and mind, as we were reading earlier tonight. And then He gives a second that's likened to it, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And He calls that the second and greatest commandment. And hang on to that, love your neighbor as yourself, because we're going to see another verse very much like that in a few minutes. When Jesus was teaching about something that would set His disciples apart, He says, a new commandment that I have given to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. Now, if He paused and just said that you love one another, that wouldn't be a new commandment. We see that back in Leviticus. What makes this a new commandment is when He says that you love one another as I have loved you. Now think about when He said that. He had just washed their feet. He was the one leading the Passover. But He did the most minimal task of the lowest servant in a household. And He changed His clothes and He put on the garb of a lowly servant. And He washed their feet. And He's on His way to die for them, for us. Lowly service, great sacrifice. He pauses between the two and He says, I want to give you a new commandment. Not that you just love one another. I want you to love one another as I have loved you. Husbands and wives, love one another as I have loved you. What kind of daily sacrifices are we willing to make and not get fed up to here with it? What kind of service are we willing to offer? And to do it, not because it's fun, but do it simply because we love our spouse as Christ has loved us. You remember the great love chapter of the Bible in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. You remember the first 3 verses talk to us about love being the motive for all that we do. And he keeps coming back to that idea that without love, it is worth nothing. What's your marriage worth? Well, we don't fight a lot. I guess it's great. No, if it does not have love at its core, it's worth nothing. And so then what's the description of love? 4 through 8 is a powerful study, and we're not going to do that tonight, but it's a powerful study of what 15 descriptions of love. But then he gives a ranking of love in verse 13 as he closes. We're not going to do this right now tonight on more intimate settings. I have done this as an exercise where the group participates, and it's really powerful. And I just ask, I say, if you'll read one of those lines that describes your spouse, I'd like for you to read and put your spouse's name in the place of love. When you read the love chapter, it's love suffers long as a kind. And I want you to think, could your spouse right now read those lines, and could they say your name and say that you suffer long and that you're kind and you don't envy and you don't parade yourself and it's not puffed up, that you do not behave rudely? Isn't it interesting, we can be nice to strangers at a grocery store and come home and be rude to the people we say we love, but love doesn't behave rudely. It doesn't seek its own. It's not provoked. Love does not think evil and it's not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in truth, and it bears all things, spouses? Does love really bear all things? It does. So do we really love our spouse? Are we willing to bear up under things, to believe all things? That's the optimism. Do we really hope all things? That's the idea of even seeing what could become if that person moves closer to the Lord. Then the beautiful is that it endures all things, it never fails. Do you realize every time a judge has a couple standing in front of him pleading for a divorce, every time, one of them, if not both, has stopped practicing agape, this type of love. If both husband and wife practice agape, a marriage doesn't end. Love never fails. We fail agape sometime, but you and I will never live a life where we fail commitments, where we fail relationships, where we hurt others, and then we say, you know how that happened? I just obeyed 1 Corinthians 13, and as things just started falling apart, and I started injuring a lot of people. No. Love never fails. We hurt our kids when we stop practicing agape. We hurt our neighbors when we stop practicing agape. We hurt our relationship with God when we stop practicing agape. We hurt our spouse when we stop practicing agape. Love never fails. And so the ranking of it, he throws out here at the end that now abides faith, hope, and love, these three. But notice he has no problem saying the greatest of these is love. God emphasizes over and over and over in Scripture, the greatest is love. In Galatians, the 5th chapter, we have the fruit of the Spirit. I do not know if there's an order to all of the characteristics that make up the fruit of the Spirit, but I do know for certain the first one is listed first for a reason. And it's because it's the greatest. The Lord says it over and over. And so He starts with love and then continues with joy and peace. And then we go to passages like Colossians, the 3rd chapter, where He's told us things that need to be put off and things that need to be put on. Like in verse 12, tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, forgiving one another. And then finally comes verse 14 and He says, but above all these things, put on love. You look at that list and you say, that list is amazing. And the Lord said, it is amazing. But let me tell you what has to come above it. The first and greatest commandment. Love God. Second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love has to come above these things, or these things will never be practiced. And just one more that we'll look at. We could look at 10 more passages like this where love is ranked and love is emphasized. But I want you to notice in Philippians, the 1st chapter, do you remember how earlier in Philippians, the 1st chapter, Paul has talked about that he remembers them in his prayers? And what's neat is, at that point, it's perhaps it's deeper and sentimental, but it's really a sentimental feeling of, wow, that's neat that Paul's praying for them. But you know that he told us even what he prayed for them. And so you skip down a few verses and you come down here to verse 9, and he says, this is what I prayed for you. And this I pray, that your love. Isn't that interesting? That's the first thing he says, I've been praying for you about. Spouses, do you pray for each other? And do you pray for each other's love? And notice he prayed that their love may abound. That's the idea of an overflowing river. That they may abound still more and more. That's the idea that it would just continue. Your love would continue. Where are you today? Spiritually, if you had to graph your life, you were born here. Along the way, is your spiritual life increasing? You're never going to arrive on this earth. If anybody here thinks, wow, I'm a strong Christian, I've arrived, I don't have any growing to do, you're already dying spiritually. And so then you think, all right, a part of this spiritual growth, according to Philippians 1, a part of this spiritual growth that just continues is the idea that every one of us has the capability to love more the longer we live. God just designed us that way. And so we can, Paul says, my prayer for you, he loves the people at Philippi. He knows they're good, faithful Christians. And so his prayer isn't, I hope you start loving. He knows they're loving people. He says, I want your love to abound I want it to just increase like a river that's flooding, and it just increases and goes more and more. And then he says, I want to abound still more and more. But now notice, he's not talking about just an emotion. He's talking about agape that's more rooted to a commitment and a decision to do what's right and best. So notice where it goes back to. It's still more and more in what? In knowledge. The love of God has roots in knowledge of truth and all discernment. That's what helps us make the right decisions, that we may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense to the day of Christ, being filled with the fruit of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. Think about your marriage in that. Does your marriage bear the fruit of God? Does your marriage show the signs of discernment? Oh, she makes such godly decisions in her marriage. He makes such great decisions in his marriage. How could that happen? There needs to be this love that is increasing, that has its roots in the knowledge of God. So with all of that being said, I'd like for you to think about Ephesians, the 5th chapter, in verse 33. You remember that Ephesians 5 is that great chapter of where the last half of the chapter is about love between Christ and the church and husband and wife. And part of the time you're reading it, it sounds like it's really a heavy focus on marriage. And other times you're reading it, it seems like it's a really great focus on Christ and the church. And there's times where you almost like, wait a minute, is he using marriage to illustrate his love for the church, or is he using his love for the church to illustrate marriage? You could argue that the beauty of the sanctity of marriage had never been raised to this high of a bar until we get to Ephesians 5. And I don't think anybody could, but if somebody thought they had kind of a leg to stand on to say, I don't really know if marriage is really all the big deal we make it out to be, you can't say that after studying Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5 brings marriage to its highest peak. It's like Christ and the church. It's that kind of beautiful, awesome relationship. And he closes that chapter by saying this, verse 33, Ephesians 5. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife. So he's speaking to husbands. Love his own wife as himself. Wait a minute. We've already read that tonight, except it didn't say wife. Remember the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so now he closes out this passage where he's talking to husbands and he says, I just want you to get the second greatest commandment correct with your wife. Love your wife as yourself. And then he speaks a word to the wives. And let the wives see that she respect her husband. Now, surely it would only be right for a husband to love and respect his wife, and it'd only be right for a wife to love and respect her husband. I don't think God would hesitate at that for a moment. I think God would say, absolutely, that's true. So I pause now and just ask you to reflect in your mind, why did he say it this way to place an emphasis on each? Why did he say, almost as a reminder to say, husbands, you're probably going to struggle a little bit more with this one, so I just want to remind you, love your wives. Wives, you might struggle a little bit more at this one, so I just want to remind you, respect your husbands. The one who made us, the one who made us very different from each other, is the one who is speaking to us with a little bit different emphasis here. God knows the challenges that husbands face. He knows the challenges that wives face. And so he says, wives, I want you to respect him. Let's think about this for just a moment from a woman's perspective. As we do this, I want to give you some statistics from a lady named Shanti, and her husband helped on one of the books. Jeff is his name, and it's Fieldhahn is their last name. And I want you to notice some questions here that reveal how some women do struggle with respect for husbands. Read the bottom of this slide first, okay? The bottom of this slide says, how often do you think about your relationship, whether it's going well or how your husband feels about you? Now notice here that almost 1/5, 19% of the women say, I'm conscious of this most all the time. And then 50% more say often, occasionally, or at least it's always in the back of my mind. So in other words, 70% of women have in their mind, either in the back of their mind or the forefront of their mind, have in their mind, how's our relationship going? Now, in case you haven't picked up, when we're talking about the woman's perspective, this is for you men to learn, right? The women know this stuff. They live it, okay? So, let's illustrate it this way. A very, very common thing when a couple comes in and says, hey, we need to talk to somebody. Can we talk to you about our marriage? Sure, come on in. They sit down. And it's not this way every time, but most every time. It's this way. You could say to each of them, say, hey, I want you to just think of a number between 1 and 10, 1 being the lesser, 10 being the greater, a number between 1 and 10. Where do you think your relationship is right now, and how critical is the conflict right now? How critical is the conflict in your relationship right now? A common thing that the husband's going to say is 2, 3. I know there's some things not good, but it's probably 2 or 3. You look over at the wife, she says 10. That's very common. Very common. Now, that same couple that the wife feels like we have some really, really serious issues going on in our relationship, you could go to that guy on the average day and say, hey, have you been thinking about your marriage and maybe how upset your wife is and maybe how things ought to be better? And the average guy is going to say, no, man, we got a great marriage. Why would I be thinking about things being better? We're doing really good. And you could go to that wife that day and you could say, hey, has it been on your mind lately about your relationship? She'd say, yeah, I cried this morning. Matter of fact, I cry every morning. Right after he leaves for work, I cry because I'm afraid we're not going to make it. Those two mindsets, married to each other, seeing each other or seeing the situation so differently, is real life. And so usually, what is a good idea is to pause, husbands, and think, when God was making men and women, which one did He make to be the nurturer? Which one did He make to be more aware of what's going on in relationships? And by the way, husband, if you're thinking right now, husband, you failed the test. Okay? And so if we're just reaching at knowledge here, and we say, the facts are this. The woman is usually more in tune to the relationship and more in tune to the nurturing of the relationship. Then what would be very wise for a man to do? It'd be very wise for a man to say, maybe we do need to talk about us. How do you think we're doing? And then when she tells you not so well, instead of just saying, that's you, remember, she became yours and you became hers and y'all are intertwined into this one relationship. And if she says your marriage isn't doing so well, bulletin here, your marriage isn't doing so well. And so it's a real good place to start. But now, I want you to notice this next one that is kind of a transition point that we'll continue on for just a moment. In the face of insecurity, I'd encourage you to reassure her. And maybe saying in a way that guys could understand it a little better. Even after you have caught her, continue to pursue her. Men by nature are fix-its. If it's broken, let's repair it. And if it's repaired, we're moving on. That's why we spent time fixing it, so it can be done and we're through. It's kind of like the hunt, you know. You go out and you hunt and you spend a lot of time, and when you finally capture, when you obtain, when it's yours, then the hunt is over. And if we're not careful, men will take that same mentality into marriage. And the idea is, hey, I'm pursuing this woman. And guys will, they will, guys don't sit around and talk to other guys like romantic stuff. But you know what? Now you think about it, guys. Guys will tell their guy friends about the hunt. They'll be like, hey, you know that girl I was telling you about? I talked to her last night. I think we're going out next weekend. Why is he doing that? It's the hunt. It's exciting. She's not mine yet, but I'm really going to make this happen. And so there's that courtship where there's a lot of sharing of heart, sharing of life, sharing of dreams. And all of this is because you want her to be yours. And that's genuine. At least let's hope it is. It should be. And so up to this point, everything's great. It's the way it ought to be. And then you get married, and the wife has this notion that all of this sharing of life and heart and relationship and communication is what makes strong relationships, and it will just continue this way. And the guy, in his foolishness, says, the hunt's over. She's mine. And the communication that was doesn't exist. And the relationship that was isn't being nurtured. I want to challenge every man here to realize no relationship is on autopilot. Any relationship you stop nurturing, it will die. I don't care what your religious commitment is. I don't care if you say, well, we don't believe in divorce. There's a lot of dead marriages that haven't divorced. And God doesn't want either one. The divorced marriage or the dead marriage. Keep in mind, God designed marriage to be like Him in the church. God designed marriage to thrive. And so when we look at this to say, what is it that God wants? He wants this relationship that is alive. He wants this relationship that is vibrant. And so husbands must continue to pursue their wives. You say, well, how do we do that? Well, do the same things that you did whenever you were pursuing her in the beginning. If you had to choose between these two, now this is asking the women because it'd be just the opposite if you ask the men statistically. If you had to choose between these two, and this is to help the men understand their wives, would you choose financial struggles, or would you choose struggles from insecurity or a lack of closeness in relationship? 70% of women said they would rather struggle financially than to not feel close to their husband. Now, when you ask men this, it's just the opposite. 70% of men say they would rather not be close to their spouse than to struggle financially. Now, why is this important for men to understand? You must realize that what your wife wants more than your salary is you. But yet, in life, and it always comes out in counseling, what are husbands going to say why they invest so much of their life in their career? Well, I do it so I can provide for her. I do it so I can provide for the kids. I love them. That's why I do it. But it doesn't translate that way. Not into their lives, not into the kids' lives. Kids almost always say they'd rather have less things and more dad time. Statistically, that always comes out that way. Wives would rather have less things and more time with their husbands. And so this is what she says security is to her. To know that the two of you are close. That you make time with her and it's a priority to you. She sees that you are committed to her. She sees that you are active in the life of the home. And then number 5, she sees you make an effort to provide as long as it does not crowd out 1 through 4. Now, how difficult is that? There is not much easy about great marriages. And it might be the reason there's not a lot of great marriages on this earth. What we're talking about is going to take a lot of effort, and a lot of wisdom, and a lot of teamwork. Here's the question that, as we think about communicating with our wives, the question is, you're in serious conflict. This is ask the women. You're in serious conflict with someone. That night, you begin to tell your husband about it. He jumps up in a reasonable suggestion to fix the problem. How will you feel? I know how you guys feel. You guys think, what more could you want? You threw out a problem to me and you're throwing that out because you wanted help with the solution, and aren't we a great team? I just gave you a solution. Let's move on to something else. What's on TV tonight? I probably should have broke this slide down to give you percentages, but I'll just throw them all out to you at one time. Great. Now I know what to do. That's what 5% of the women said. Now, 100% of the men thought that was a great idea. Number 2, the second one was, okay, the wife saying, okay, I am interested in your suggestion, but I really wanted to discuss this more. 35% said that. Okay, I appreciate his suggestion, but I wanted, this is huge, I wanted emotional support. And that's shown how? By listening. 38% said that. So see, now we're already way above 75% with the top 3 answers. Next said, I needed emotional support and to listen. And 14% said that. I need his emotional support and I'm hurt that he will not listen to me. 2% said that. And then the bottom 5% said, I'm upset and hurt because he didn't show emotional support, jumped in and cut me off and didn't listen anymore. We're different. Women love to take communication as if it's an aircraft and just fly it around. Just fly it around. Just fly it around. And when you get done talking, it's still just flying around. Men like to come into a conversation, and men like to know, which runway are we landing this? Let me tell you, I can figure out the best place for this. We could do this, or we could do this, or we could settle it this way. And because men have that mindset that says, let's fix it and let's move on, and the man is thinking from a man's perspective, foolishly thinking that's what his wife wants. And so when his wife comes in from work and she says, oh, you wouldn't believe what they did at work today. First this person came in and said this, and then this person said this, and then they turned it on me. And so you're thinking, I tell you what you do next time that happens. The next time that happens, you turn to this one, and you turn to this one, and you say this one to this, and you say this to this, and you put them on the spot with each other, and that'll settle it right there. And you're thinking to yourself, man, I'm wise as Solomon. No, man, you're a fool. The reason you really, really messed up is a couple of fold. Number one, you started giving solutions, and she never asked for one. Big mistake. If your wife wants you to give a suggestion of a solution, she will say something like this: what do you think I should do? Now, have you noticed how seldom she says that to you? There's a reason why. Because she does not want your solution. When she comes in frustrated at the end of a day's work and she is flying this around, she wants to know that you care. That's it. She wants to know you are on her side. She wants to know that she is secure with you. You will be her companion in life. And on that rare occasion that she wants your solution, she might say, so what would you have done? But if she doesn't, I hate that you wives have to hear this, but I'm being genuine, I really am. But I know we got to go to elementary to help us guys, so here's Communication 101 with your wife. She's voiced the problem at work or wherever it is, and so you suppress the need to fix. That's 101. This is not the time for you to fix anything. All you're going to do is convince her that you love her. How do you do it? You listen with your eyes. You stop what you're doing and you look her in the eyes as she's telling you about the frustration. Occasionally, you make noises. You listen and you say, oh, really? And then if she takes a breather, I'm serious as a heart attack. If she takes a breather, all you do is summarize what she said. You mean to tell me when you went to work today that she came in and said this and she came in and said that and they turned it on you? And stop. And she'll say, yes. And she is going to think you are the best husband in the world. Like you understand. You are with her in this. And you're going to listen a little bit more and you're going to say, yeah. And you can throw out an occasional, I hate that. Oh, I'm sorry. And then after she's flown this and never even picked out an airport, no landing strip, no reason at all. It will make no sense to any man in this room. She will just, for no reason, stop talking about it and walk over and give you the biggest hug and say, you're the best husband in the world, and walk out of the room. And you're just going to be like, what did we just do? Like in your mind, you're thinking, we accomplished nothing. And in her mind, she's like, I am the luckiest woman on this earth. I've got the best husband that God ever created. And so I want you to think about, don't think that once you're married, you stop pursuing her. But then you say, okay, how am I going to pursue her? It's not, let me work more hours so I can buy more things. It's, let me make sure she knows that I want to be close to her. That means you have to give time and communication. But don't ever confuse communication to mean I've got to just give a lot of verbiage that has a lot of facts in it. Because for the most part, She's not looking for those things at all as much as for her to know that you love her. All right. Okay, we got to make some time really quickly here. Okay, let's look at this next part here about where he says, for husbands, love your wives. Wives, when we think about these same kind of statistics that came out of Phil Hahn's study, you could ask husbands, men would rather feel alone and unloved than inadequate and disrespected. Which would it be? Would men rather feel unloved or disrespected? Think about the end of Ephesians 5:33. Almost 3/4 of men say they would rather feel alone and unloved than to feel disrespected. So during conflict with a wife over day-to-day issues, you are more likely during that time of conflict to feel like your wife disrespects you than your wife doesn't love you. Now, say it's just the opposite for women. In times of conflict, women will feel unloved and instead of disrespected. And so then you go back from these studies and just the way God makes us as men, and you say, hey, what can you deal with better? Like if your wife is really disrespectful, can you handle that? And most men will say, that pushes my limits. I just can't hardly stand it. And then what if you said to that same guy, hey, when your wife kind of treats you in ways that is lacking love, they're unloving, can you handle that? And the man say, yeah, it hurts, but I can handle that. Wives, it's important for you to grasp that. You're not wired that way, but your husband is wired that way. And so when it comes to just even your off-the-cuff comments about his work, the slightest off-the-cuff comment that would disrespect his work cuts him to the core. So he tries to fix things around the house, and sometimes it doesn't go right. But when you announce that to all of his friends, and everybody gets a good laugh out of it, deep down inside, you've hit him where it hurts the worst. Not because he didn't fix the dishwasher, because you disrespected him in front of everybody. The way God wired men, it will never be okay to disrespect them. I think about a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, I was talking with a husband and wife. And I gave her a list in a book to read of things that you can do that are disrespectful to your husband. Because I think in our society today, we have become so disrespectful, we don't even know what disrespect is. And so she was reading a list of things, and he was reading that same list. And I kid you not, you can't make stuff like this up. They're sitting side by side in the chair, and she looks at the list. And just like you're announcing what the weather is outside, she looked and she said, I do every one of those to you. That doesn't bother you, does it? And this big guy, he almost started crying. He said, yeah, every time. And you're right. You do every one of these all the time. Wives need love. They need the tender emotion. They need the genuine concern. They need you to love them enough to learn them. But wives, your husband needs respect. They need you to take the time to learn what is disrespectful and what is respectful. And they need you to love them enough to respect them. There's a lot more that we could say, but the clock says stop. Let's bow.